Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this presentation, 10 Things You Should Probably Know About Radio Mics. So we were here last year as well. It's a pleasure to be back, and hopefully there'll be some good things in here. We're aiming to cover off a selection of topics to give you kind of some rough background, some tips and tricks, hoping there's something in you that will help you operate your radio mic systems better in your churches, whether you're a church with 12 handheld radio mics and 8 ways of wireless ears, or whether you're just a church with one handheld radio mic. Hopefully there'll be something here that you can grab a hold of. So who am I? My name's Dave Scarlett, and I tend to do some things like this. So I'm an RF coordinator. I'm also a monitor sound engineer, and I go around coordinating radio mics and making those systems play well. On the right hand side there's Park Life Festival. I did that last year. We had 340 radio mic and IEM systems across the weekend, all coordinated and playing nicely together, which is a logistical and mathematical challenge, but really good fun. And I also go and visit loads of churches around the UK and help them out with their radio mic systems and getting some better performance. I don't want you to think I'm completely all boring and no fun. So here's 3 other things about me. I like taking pictures of myself eating ice cream. I like sitting in children's furniture in IKEA. And I like trains. Obviously, you'll notice I'm also a millennial, so I was tempted to call this a nice clickbaity title like this, but hopefully these aren't things you'll never have guessed. Hopefully these are things that actually you'll have seen and maybe had a few ideas about, and we'll put some bones around them. So we're going to kick off with number 1 of my 10 things, which is don't be a pirate. So I want to talk a little about the frequency spectrum for radio mics and the laws surrounding it, because these things are regulated. So this is a bit of a picture of the UK RF spectrum, and this diagram's a little bit out of date, but it covers all the way from 3 kilohertz on the left to 30 gigahertz on the bottom right, and that's obviously a huge chunk of space, and that's most of what we'd consider the RF spectrum in the UK. And the key takeaway here is that's just really, really busy. All of those different colours and blocks are different users, and that's just crazy. So there has to be some organisation. So if we break it down a little bit more to the bit we're interested in, this is between 300 meg and 1 gig. And this is what we would consider the spectrum we work in most of the time. And the takeaway here is those 2 yellow blocks in the middle, PMSE, live events and broadcast, that's us. That's our bit. But you'll see we're already sharing with other users. We are penned in by other users, and there's all sorts of stuff around us and on top of us and below us. So we have to have some tight coordination for this all to work, and therefore that means regulation. So how does this pan out for us? So turn that around, and we start at 470 meg and go up to 870 meg. That's what's useful to us, and that is the spectrum known as PMSE, and that stands for Program Making and Special Events. Now, we tend to be the special events side of that, and our telly friends would be the program making side, but that's what we're all called together. So we break our spectrum up into TV channels. Now those TV channels are 8 megahertz wide in this country, and you'll see we're starting at 21 and we're going up to 70. That kind of breaks down where we're at. So let's start putting some stuff on this to work out where we are, how we live, how it breaks down. So the first bit we're going to talk about is right up the top there. There's a 2 megahertz slice in channel 70, and that is the license-free spectrum. Now, what that means is that anybody can use it for PMSE radio mics or in-ear monitors, and you can freely use that however you like, anywhere in the UK, without paying a license fee and without registering. Free is great. The downside to this is there is no selectivity in that. Your next door neighbor can also do the same thing. It's also quite a small space. It's only 2 meg, so practically that's going to be 4 radio mics, maybe 5 or 6 with some of the more premium products. So let's step up a gear, and we've got the shared license, which we often call the channel 38 license. So channel 38 there in the middle, 606 to 614, is a TV channel that's been set aside just for PMSE usage, our usage. Now, what that means is that you can't operate any other form of television transmitter or anything like that in there. But you will find that it's called a shared license. So what do we mean by that? We mean that you must pay a license and register, so license, but that is shared. So your next door neighbor can still utilize the same if he also possesses a license. But there's more space there. We've gone from 2 megahertz to 8 megahertz. Therefore, there's a higher chance you'll be able to find some frequencies that he's not using and will all be safe. The second thing available there is right up the top, between 65 and 66, there's this 9 megahertz slice, which is known as the duplex gap, and that's from 823 to 832. Now, that's an interesting little bit of spectrum there. It was added by the European Union a few years ago, and it's designed to work all across the EU for our sector usage. In the UK, we've chosen to use that as part of the shared license, so you can use either on your license. So let's step up a gear again, and we go to the coordinated license. So this is what's known as a specific license, a site license, anything like that. And there's some chunk in there, and that's all the green stuff. So 21 through 37, 39 through 48. The header is wrong. Now, what do we mean by coordinated or specific license? This means you have to register with Ofcom specifically to use your radio mic at your location on a given frequency. So if you're a church, you could register for your 4 radio mic frequencies at your church. Now, those are never shared. So within a geographical boundary, Ofcom will not let anyone else use the same. So you have safety, but you obviously pay a small cost premium for that. You also lose the ability to move around. So it wouldn't be great for, say, a mobile church that met in 3 locations, but it would be great if your church was in a busy city, next to entertainment venues, things like that. So then the last chunk of spectrum we have available to us here, or unavailable as it is this red chunk, which is the unavailable spectrum. Now, this has increased in the last little while. It used to be the sector on the bottom from 61 through 69, not including the duplex gap. And that was cleared in 2012. And then the chunk between 49 and 60, unfortunately, was cleared in May 2020. And that has moved on, and that is being used for 5G mobile. Now, that spectrum is not only not permissible to use, illegal to use for our usage now, but also it's pretty inadvisable because it tends to be really quite noisy. And I'll illustrate that later. So it's well worth a check if you've got some perhaps slightly older radio mics that you've had for a while, that you're not in this inadvisable, unavailable, illegal spectrum. We do see this quite a lot. So we can put it all together and we see we've coloured in the whole thing from 21 through 70 into our different categories, showing us the different ways we can use no money to a bit more money to gain a bit more total bandwidth available, or selectivity, or exclusivity. So let's turn that round, same data, and start looking at how this relates to some equipment. So we don't need the stuff on the left, so I'll put a title there. So if we take a Sennheiser 100, 300, 500 series mic, which we see in a lot of churches in the GB band, and this is what most people sell now, if we pop that up, we're going to see that we have the ability to use channel 38 with that mic. We also have the ability to use channel 39 and 40 with that mic. So if we're going to use that GB band mic, tuning between 606 and 648, we're going to need to pay for some kind of license, be it shared or coordinated. So let's put something else, say a Shure mic. We're brand agnostic here, and we can see there it's the same kind of story in that K3E band. It's slightly less wide, so we might be a little bit more restricted what we could use our license. Let's put something a bit more premium up, like a QLXD, you know, kind of moving towards the £1,000 a mic kind of range. And what we can see there is it's got a much bigger tuning range. So in challenging scenarios, that's going to be better from a ability to license wherever we like range. Now, let's put an interesting thing up. So this is the same Sennheiser 100 series we looked at a second ago, but rather than the GB band, it's in the E band. So it's in a different place. So it's tuning in a different range. So let's pop that up there, and we can see it's up the right-hand side now. It's in a very different place. And there's three things I want to point out with this, because these are seen hugely in churches and very historically as well. So the first bit we have there up the top is the license-free section. So this mic can tune license-free. So it's great. We can operate it without paying any money. The second thing we have is it can tune into the duplex gap of the shared license. So this could be quite useful if we wanted to start license-free, but maybe at some point add some more mics and start using shared as well. But what we have to be careful of is in the middle there's this unusable section, and that's the bit that we're legally not allowed to use. So we have to be careful we're not tuned into that. And I see a lot of churches that are still stuck right in the middle there on 854 or something like that. And the reason I say not only is this illegal, but it's also inadvisable, this is a spectrum scan from my house, and it's showing you there the unusable spectrum highlighted in red, and you can see there on the left there's that huge chunk of noise there, and that's all to do with mobile telecoms now. So you wouldn't want to use that. That's going to severely impact the performance of your radio mics. And the section on the right there is quiet because we weren't using many mobile phones in the village I was living in at the time, but you could see that peak up hugely during shows. So let's put some other stuff up there just to give you an idea. When we start going for more premium systems like your high-end Sennheiser, your Shure Accent, that kind of stuff, you gain much wider tuning bandwidth and the ability to use different bands. The Sennheiser there shown the G3 in different bands as well, to show that if you needed to use other types of licensing, you could do that. So we keep talking about licensing. How does that work? Really briefly. So we license through Ofcom, who are the regulator. They deal with all licensing all around the UK, and we use the PMSE portal for them. And that's a dedicated team that kind of know what we do and speak our language. So the shared license we've spoken about, we can buy yearly for £75 or 2 yearly for £135, so a little bit cheaper. And the specific licenses or the coordinated licenses are a little more complicated, but are about £28 frequency. If we can batch them together inside one TV channel, we can pay a bit less by the time we get to 6. One top tip I'll give you if you're going to look into licensing and doing that if you need to is use the online portal to book it yourself. Don't fill in the paper form or ring them up because you get it cheaper. So that was thing number one. Let's move on to thing number two. Relationships matter. Frequencies, or what's that intermodulation thing anyway? So intermodulation, maybe you've heard the term, maybe you haven't. It was mentioned yesterday a couple of times. What is it? How does it occur? What does it cause? And how can we avoid it? So intermodulation is where two or more signals, wireless mic signals, combine in a non-linear stage and they interfere. Now, a non-linear stage is a bit of a technical term, but I could say amplifier instead. Now, the bad news is, of course, that all our radio mic systems have amplifiers in. So we can combine two radio wave signals in that amplifier, and what happens is harmonic distortion is created. Now, what that means is we get noise floor raises hugely. We can create phantom signals, which might even cause other receivers that we're not using to open up and create noise. And so that intermodulation is really not great. It's going to cause all sorts of problems for our operation of our radio mics. It might cause dropouts and things like that. So how can we avoid it? Well, the paper answer is we have to do some complicated maths because it's a harmonic sequence, so we can work that out. But the real answer is we don't do that very often unless it's a training exercise. The easy way is we use something like this. So this is from Sennheiser, and it's a bank and frequency chart. So Sennheiser have helpfully calculated for their systems these charts. And as long as you use frequencies from within one bank, all of those will play together nicely and not intermodulate between them. Now, Shure also produce these. And if you're using one or other, that's really handy. Now, obviously, sometimes systems are a bit more complicated. We want to include in-ear monitors and mix manufacturers and things like that. And what we would do there is we would use something like a piece of software called Wireless Workbench. This belongs to Shure. There are other things out there. Sennheiser have one as well. I just happen to like this one. There was a great session yesterday on Wireless Workbench from Jack at Shure. If you missed that, hopefully that will be available to catch up on, but it was really good. As you can see here, I've got 110 odd frequencies calculated in there across lots of systems. And so that's how we do that. So number 3 is farms are for tractors, not for antenna. What do we mean by that? So I think we've probably all seen something a bit like this before, where we've got a load of receivers and they've all got antennas on, and it's this little farmy nest of antennas, and it's a messy thing. Now, not only is it messy, it actually is really bad for our performance. Antennas have a pickup pattern, a lot like a microphone. We have omni antennas, directional antennas, things like that. And when we put antennas very close to each other, what they do is they actually interact, and that pickup pattern can be destroyed or affected, which means those antennas don't operate as we'd like, which could cause dropouts, poor system performance. The other thing is they start stealing power from each other, which is an electromagnetic phenomenon, which is not ideal. So, also, the other thing we can find is that it can increase that intermodulation thing. And we spent so long using a frequency chart or using Workbench to calculate it. So we don't want to do this. So how do we fix this? Well, there's a bit of kit for that. So there's 2 here. There's a Sennheiser one, there's a Shure one, there's other manufacturers available. These are known as antenna splitters or antenna distribution units. And what they do is they allow us to take a single pair of antennas and then split them with some isolation to all our receivers. And what that means is that because of the isolation, they can't see each other and they don't fight and they don't cause that destructive pattern. If we want to build big systems, we can chain multiple of these antenna distros up a long, long way. So number 4 is social distancing is for transmitters too. So we all know that we as people don't want to get too close now, but we often do this with our radio mic transmitters, our belt packs and our handhelds. And I see this a lot in churches where churches that have got, say, several handhelds and belt packs, things like that. And what they tend to do is they get put together because there's a special place they live in. And sometimes that's the altar. Sometimes that could be the special mic table. And this causes problems. So I'd love to tell you a story about a church I went to see a year or so ago. And they're a gospel church. So they have lots of handhelds on stage because they have backing vocals that use that. And they're having terrible problems. So I go and watch on a Sunday morning. And what happens is they do opening praise and worship, and it's amazing. And then the 12 people come off stage, and they put their handheld mics in the special stands. And they're 4-way stands like this. They have 4 mic clips, and they put them in that. And there's 3 of them. And they grab them all together, and they get taken over to Monitor World. And then there's 4 other handhelds for the service leader and the preacher and things like that. So let's have a look at some data around this. So when they're all on stage and we are all spread out, we get this situation. So this is a spectrum scan, and those red peaks are our mics, our desired mics, the 16 handheld mics. And so they are all nice, clean peaks, all apart from each other. And we've got a bit of noise floor, the green, but it's pretty good. We're happy. We're in licensed spectrum for some of these. So then I did the same scan with the mics all placed together in a probably meter square. And this happened. This is huge. So if I just put them next to each other so you can see them, not only did we create noise floor within the pattern of the mics, but all the way out. And you can see that effectively is just making our mics completely unusable. And so that was a really good situation of showing this as one of the best examples I've got. But by simply bringing them together, we created all that noise and intermodulation and nasty stuff that was giving them real operation problems. So what we did was we spread them out. So how do we fix it? Well, number 1 is we just keep some distance. Maybe that means that rather than putting 2 handhelds next to each other, we put them on either side of the stage or either side of the steps, that sort of thing. But the other thing we can do that we do on a lot of shows is we do this. We use some metal containers. These are literally takeaway trays to create some isolation around the mics. And it does a couple of things, but it essentially stops them interfering with each other. And you too can have the joy of buying takeaway containers or washing up the ones from your latest Just Eat order. So number 5 is pole position goes to your antenna. So this applies whether we're using the antennas on the back of our radio mic or whether we're using external antennas. We should think really hard about the best place to put our antenna. So a lot of churches, we see the radio mics at the receivers at front of house, which is probably at the back of the room, and the transmitters on stage. So what we've done is we've put a load of distance between those two things. But also, those mics tend to be, on the desktop or maybe even under the desk. So they're quite low down. And then we put a load of people in the way. So we've created a situation where there's people and distance in the way. So let's look at some data on that. Well, if we say 30 meters is probably about the distance between front and back in a lot of churches, we could be losing 58 dB in that distance. The other thing we could be doing is losing 6 dB or more per human body, depending on water content and whether you're a bit fat like me or not. So I did a little experiment to show this. And on the right-hand side there, you can see 2 bits of data. And this is with a handheld transmitter on stage. And I simply took the receiver at desk height at front of house and brought it up above my head height, above all the people. And you can see there's a 15 dB difference there. So it's really significant. So it's really important to think about where we can put our antennas. Can we get closer to stage? If we can't, can we go higher up? Can we avoid shading them by people? So we've talked about receivers, but also we can affect where our transmitters are placed. So here's a nice little picture which comes from our friends at Shure. And this is our chap who's got his belt pack transmitter in the small of his back behind him, you can see there. And the red and blue lines are showing us the pickup pattern of a receiver at that point, or the radiation of the transmitter, either way. And as you can see there, behind him, really good. On the sides, pretty good. But on the front, actually, we're losing 15 or more dB. It's pretty poor. So could we create a better situation? We could move our receivers to the side or the back of stage. That would be great. But maybe we can't do that. Maybe we don't have a multi-core or there's no space. What about if we move the transmitter? If we move the transmitter to his side, we turn this diagram by 90 degrees. And we'd get much better performance at front of house than by having it in the small of his back. So that's something to think about. And as an added bonus, if we put it on his side, then when he sits down, it won't dig him in the back. So it's going to be really, really nice. So that's one of those things when we're miking people up, maybe just think about where they're going to wear the belt pack. If you've got the receiver side of stage, maybe try and get the belt pack the same side. That sort of thing. But yeah, good takeaway there. So number 5, we've spoken about external antenna. What about them? So this isn't going to be relevant to all churches. Bigger churches, those with challenging scenarios are probably going to do this, but a lot won't. So there's all sorts of antennas we use. Obviously, there's the whip antennas on the left, which you get as factory on the back of your receiver. And then there's all sorts of other ones and specialist things and whatever. And there's a load of factors that play into the choices we'd make. But there's 3 things I want to pick up relevant to antennas, particularly if you've got them, maybe think about, or if you're thinking about using them to think about. So ground plane, multipath, and cable. So the first one is ground plane. Well, what is ground plane? Well, it's an effect where some antennas require a ground reference to work properly. Now, all the whip antennas that we get on the back of our radio mics, Sennheiser, Shure, all that kind of stuff, tend to require a ground plane. So what we can't do is what we're seeing in this picture here, which is just stick it on a bit of cable and lash it up to something. That actually really affects the performance of our antenna, and that's not great. So we need to not do that. Either we need to use a dedicated external antenna, or we need to use a mounting plate that allows us to a ground plane, and some of the manufacturers make those. So another thing we need to think about is multipath. What is multipath? Well, I've done some little pictures to try and help illustrate this. So we have a radio mic transmitter, a handheld or a belt pack, doesn't matter, and a receiver. Now, what happens is our transmitter radiates and our receiver receives. That's really easy. But if we imagine that our transmitter is actually a speaker and our receiver is a listener, because it's waves, it's the same thing, we know that our transmitter isn't just going to laser beam to the receiver. We know it's going to bounce off other surfaces, a bit like that. Now, we also know that when our sound bounces off surfaces, we can achieve nulls or cancellations at the listener. And this isn't ideal. You know, we've all experienced that dead spot. Well, the bad news is radio mics do exactly the same thing. We can achieve a time arrival of the bounce signal that will create cancellations with the good signal. And that's going to lead to dropouts or other issues. So how can we fix it? Well, we use two antennas because chances are the bounce path is going to be a different length to both. So if one is in a cancellation, the other one won't be. So we want to do two antennas. So we want to space them out. But the debate is often, how far do we space those antennas? Well, the idea is we want to be doing a minimum of a quarter of a wavelength. Closer than that, we're getting no benefit by spacing. So let's take 650 meg as a nice number somewhere in the middle of where we're around, round number. And it's about 18 inches, the wavelength. So a quarter is 4.5. Now, those of you who are quicker than me will suddenly be thinking, hold on, 4.5 inches? That's about the gap between the antennas on the back of my receiver. And that's the reason for that. But we get benefits as we increase all the way through one wavelength and keep going above one wavelength. Now, there's no benefit when we're 30 meters apart in reality, but more is better in general. So it's well worth thinking, if you're going to start doing external antennas, start spacing them out. The last thing I want to talk about briefly with external antennas is cable. So the headline is all RF and equipment and cable should be 50 ohms. Now, video coax is 70 ohms. It looks similar. It's got the same BNC cables, but it's 75 ohm. It's a different cable standard. We see quite a lot of churches where someone's lashed a bit of video cable in because it looks right and sort of works, and it quite degrades the performance. So well worth checking, if you've got some external antennas, that you're actually on the right kind of cable. The other thing I want to touch on is that different cables have different losses, and so by manipulating the cable, you can create a better situation. Obviously, you pay more for the more premium and less for the less. You know, there's a million different cables, but that just gives you an idea. So number 6 is gain structure. So we have to work on the principle, hopefully everyone understands, that mixing consoles want to be a line level summation device. And we know this because the first stage in all our mixing consoles is a preamplifier that turns our mic signal into a line. So our radio mics already have a preamplifier in and a coming line. So ideally, we want to create a flat gain structure through our system. So we're not adding loads of gain and creating noise, or padding down and destroying some of our dynamic range. So how do we do that? Well, there's 3 gain structures in our system, 3 points: transmitter, receiver, and the desk. So starting with the transmitter, it's most important that we get our transmitter gain right. And that's for 2 reasons. One is, if we're too low, we're going to be in the noise floor and it's going to sound naff. And if we're too high, we're going to clip. And the big problem, the second reason, is that once we've handed that belt pack out and it's gone on stage and the pastor's wearing it, we can't do anything about it. We can't pull the guy off and suddenly change it. So we have to get this right. So it's really important when you're setting up the system to look at that metering on that receiver and see where you're at. You know, you want to be in that good 2/3, not hitting the top, not down the bottom range. And that's really important. So wear the same headset your preacher's going to wear, or put the lapel mic on and try and talk in kind of roughly the same level. That's really important. So the second stage of gain is at the receiver. Now, I've shown a Shure, a Sennheiser, an Audio-Technica here to kind of show the different ways. Some things have a switch, some things have a knob, and some things have a digital menu structure to allow you to set the gain. Now, we want to keep these things as close to line as possible. So on the Shure, that's easy. It's a switch. On the Sennheiser, it's in the menus, and we probably want to be about plus 12 to be kind of in a line zone on the Sennheiser. And on those Audio-Technicas, it'll probably be sort of 2, 3 o'clock on the knob, and on some of the better stuff, they even provide a marking for that. So the third place we have a gain structure is at the mixing desk. And we should be able, in theory, by now to have a flat gain structure. So we should set our mixing desk to 0 dB on the preamp, and we should get a nice healthy signal. Now, what some people find is that on some cheaper consoles, the XLR input can't take line level. So at that point, I always recommend using a XLR to jack to get into the line input, which is on jack on those consoles. I think that's helpful. But yeah, so ideally we should be flat all the way through, and we should have line all the way through. And at that point, we're getting the best performance in terms of dynamic range from the system. So number 7 is in-ear monitors. Keep your distance. So lots of churches are now starting to have wireless in-ear monitors. Certainly the last few years, it's becoming quite common. All sorts of cheaper systems are coming on the market and making this possible. And, our worship leaders are wanting to not be tied down. So we're starting to add them. So we're seeing a lot of times the in-ear monitor system gets bought, it gets plunked on top of the rack with the rest of the kit, and we see a bit of weird performance. So I wanted to illustrate this for you. So we've got a typical scenario here we've got our receivers, our RX, on the side of stage, because we listened earlier about distance, and that's good. We've got our transmitter, handheld belt pack, doesn't matter, on stage, and that's good. That's our TX. So that's radiating like this. It's representative. It's not true. And you can see we're getting a good signal to our receiver. Things are all happy. Let's add our IM transmitter that one of the band has decided we need. So our mic's still radiating like this, and our IM's transmitting. Now, at our mic receiver, we're getting a lot more signal from the IM transmitter than the mic transmitter. So we're probably going to be hitting the front end stage in that mic receiver really hard, and this is going to degrade our performance. So how could we fix it? Well, we could move the IM transmitter to the other side of stage, because now mic is radiating as it should do. The IM transmitter is radiating as it should do. But the mic receiver is receiving way less of the output from the IM transmitter. Really simple fix, and we've done it. If we were using external antennas, we could move our antennas rather than moving the actual transmitters. But if we're using the onboard little whips, then maybe we move the actual units. Now, someone's going to be smart in a second and say, but hold on, they're on different frequencies. Surely they shouldn't affect each other. Well, this is a scan of a common IM product. That's what I'll say about that. And as you can see in the middle with the blue line, we have the desired carrier frequency. But you can see there, it has shoulders, and as audio is modulated, it moves around a bit. And you can see those shoulders with those little fuzzies, and that stuff is showing in detail that just because we're using a dedicated carrier frequency doesn't mean we don't have some stuff either side of it. And that's what causes those problems that the mic receiver will receive. So that distance thing is the best way of affecting that. So number 8 is squelch. Now, squelch, I think, is one of the most misunderstood functions on radio mics, and I wanted to find a way to illustrate it for you in a simple way. So I wanted to tell you about roller coasters. I love roller coasters. I really like going on them. But when I go on roller coasters, I often find there's screaming children on them. And I like to roller coaster in peace. I don't like screaming children. And so I was thinking, how is it I enjoy some roller coasters better than others, because some don't let small children on, and how do we define whether children are allowed on a roller coaster or not? Well, we use one of these. We say you must be this tall to ride, and we decide at what point a child is, to the theme park operator, dangerous, or to me, background noise, and we set a height threshold. and that says whether they can come in or not. Well, a squelch gate is exactly the same as this. We say there's a threshold at which something changes from background noise to desired signal. So let me show this in a slightly more technical way. On the bottom there, we have grey background noise. We have a blue desired mic signal, and this is at the receiver. So if we have no squelch at all, we have background noise coming in, and this could cause problems. So we can set our squelch at threshold B. And what this does is this keeps our background noise out. It says, you're all background noise, you're not tall enough, you're not coming in. And our blue mic signal, which is louder, is excellent. That can come in. But if we're not careful and we just think more, we turn up to squelch threshold A and we've kept the background noise out. But what we've also done is we've kept our desired mic signal out. And this is one of these things. Sometimes we find that we've cranked it up a bit too hard and we're causing ourselves problems. So I'd really recommend the way to set squelch is turn your transmitters off and look at the metering on your receivers. See a bit of noise. So turn the squelch up until the noise is removed. And at that point, turn your transmitter on. Walk your transmitter around the entire coverage zone you want to use, be that the church, the auditorium, the whatever, and use your body to make sure you're getting the worst case scenario and make sure your audio is getting in. Now, if your squelch is too high, you'll find your mic drops out, and at that point, you might have to compromise by bringing the squelch down a little bit. But we have to find that compromise. The worst thing is for the mic to drop out. So number 9 is pilots aren't just on planes. Now, hopefully we've all seen in our mic receivers a thing that's called pilot or tone key or tone lock or something like that. And a lot of people don't know what this is. So it's an ultra high frequency tone, around 19 kilohertz usually, which is superimposed on top of our mic signal. And what it does is it allows our receivers to differentiate between good audio mic signals and bad background noise, because TV transmitters and other background noise don't have this special tone in, but mic transmitters do. And so just like a squelch, rather than using a level dependent thing, we can have a selectivity that goes pilot tone good, no pilot tone bad. Now, in general, there's no reason to turn this off. Occasionally, if we're doing something a bit more complicated with mixing manufacturers or transmitting from certain units to certain units, we might need to. But in general, for most church applications, pilot tone should be turned on. And it's well worth a check on your receivers because we often see it off. Also worth pointing out that there'll generally be a pilot setting on both the transmitter and the receiver, and they both need to be on, or they both need to be off. Otherwise, they tend not to work. So pilot tone, check that one out. And the last thing from me is headsets aren't just for Madonna. Now, luckily, I think we're slowly but surely winning this battle with churches at the moment. But traditionally, we've used lapel mics, which have often ended up down here and tend to sound pretty bad. Now, headsets, they're the new thing. They're not new, but they're coming in with churches. And yeah, they give significant benefits. We're getting more acoustical gain at the mic because quite simply the distance is shorter. We get a better direct sound. We get consistent positioning even when I move my head from side to side, unlike you would with a lapel. We get less clothes noise. In those Anglican high churches, the Catholic churches where they're using big robes and stoles and things like that, that can be really big where a lapel gets covered over. The other thing is we just get a nice thicker sound because of the proximity effect. Now, headsets don't need to be a world of expense. I think we've all seen the premium products, the DPAs, the Countryman's, which are amazing and £400-500 a headset. But the reality is you can buy yourself a cheap headset. And just to prove the point, this is actually a £30 headset I'm using here today. I had the option of a Countryman. I just pulled this one because I thought it would be amusing. So you can spend as little as that kind of money and get improved performance. Obviously, the premium options are going to be better. But if your church is 30 people and your tech budget is 50 quid a year, then let's go with the 30 quid option to start with. So they've been my 10 things that hopefully are going to give you some top tips to go away, take a look, check up, and see if you can improve your system performance. So I'm going to leave you with this, which has got my email on in case anyone wants to get in touch. And I'm going to dive into the chat, and feel free to stick some questions in. I've got about 6 minutes before I need to jump across to the main Q&A. So we'll see if we do that. I'm just going to flick through now when I find my watch again. Yeah, so Steve had a question about, is it legal to use radio mics within 38, 65, 70 if your transmitter has the ability to tune outside that range? So I think we covered that fairly well. Essentially, you must possess the right license for where you wish to use your mics, regardless of where you can tune to. If you want to use license free, then use that. If you want to use spectrum that's covered by the shared license, you must possess one. It's worth pointing out that these things are covered by the Wireless and Telegraphy Act, which is a fairly nasty piece of legislation originally developed for pirate radio, hence my joke about don't be a pirate. The penalties can be quite big. They tend to be fines and confiscation of equipment. So it is really important to get this right. There isn't a huge amount of enforcement, but if they do catch you, they will tend to be very harsh with it. Let's see if we have any other questions. Yes, so we had a question about 2.4 gigahertz radio mics. That is a topic that has gone around over the last 5 or so years, over and over and again. I know many people that are successfully using 2.4 gigahertz radio mics. Personally, I always stray away from them for a whole bunch of reasons. For me, my mic here is running in the license-free zone, 864 meg. Essentially, there's unlikely to be a huge amount of other users in my church context doing that. But my 2.4 gigahertz, well, my iPhone, my MacBook, everyone else's smart devices are all running in that band. So for me, why would we invite all those competing devices into our spectrum? So I would steer away, but I know people are having great success with it. For me, those environments with lots of Wi-Fi and lots of devices, which we're seeing more and more now, are really, really challenging. There is the ability now to use another piece of spectrum, which I haven't talked about today, which is 1.8, 1.9 gig, and a lot of the manufacturers now have stuff in that. I know Sennheiser have a D 1.8 range, and that's kind of in that Wi-Fi range, but obviously out of what the consumer Wi-Fi would be. Could be an option, but for me, I would stick with the UHF stuff between channel 21 and channel 70. It's tried and tested, and it's designed for what we do. Let me just have a quick page through. Yes, 100 series Sennheiser does only have low, medium, and high. Is one of those feature limitations, but often I think you can find a nice mix in that. It's very rare to need high squelch on those Sennheiser units. Generally, if that's happening, there's something else going on, like antennas being used wrongly or some dodgy cable or something like that. But obviously your mileage may vary. If high squelch is working fine, nailed it. There was a absolutely true comment from Simon about there not being a great deal of proximity effect on a Omni mic. However, of course, we do have cardioid headsets available to us, and sometimes we do use that in a church context if we need a more directional thing. Obviously, at that point, it would make sense. But yes, an Omni would be less so. But anyone who watched Bo's presentation will know that where we put a mic has different effects on the sound we receive. But I'm not going to talk about that because he's far cleverer than me. There is a comment from Steve about shared spectrum and building sites. Yeah, totally. Shared spectrum is shared. Within reason, anyone can use it for anything that is PMSE. I'm not going to suggest that, you go knocking on people's doors and pretending to be the RF police, but sometimes a conversation can lead to a solution between the two of you. But yeah, see how you go. Sometimes if you really need to protect the quality of your session, the appropriate thing to do is to use that coordinated specific licensing. I was at a church just a couple of weeks ago where it's really important to them that nothing should befall their live stream, and they're concerned that they're in a busy area. So we found some coordinated frequencies for them, and they're going to use those. Another question: are we likely to lose more frequencies to TV, 5G, or new products? In the very near future, no, but we just have. So we just cleared the 700 meg spectrum, which is 694 to 790. It happened in May. That was all because of 5G. It's now illegal to operate radio mics in that range. And as yet, I'm not seeing a huge amount of noise in that. But obviously, we all know the 5G rollout's quite a slow ramp up because of devices and stuff. But yeah, we're going to see that become much like that DSO clearing in 2012. Ofcom tend to produce great diktats about how the future is going to go, and then those things tend to change depending on what other people's use cases and needs are. So it's really hard to kind of crystal ball what's going to happen. But what we should be able to say is that certainly things like 38, the shared bands, should be grand for a good little while. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm going to jump across to the main Q&A now. So feel free to jump across with us on that one. If you want to keep asking RF questions, that is great. Otherwise, feel free to send me an email. It's david.scala@sflgroup.co.uk. It's on the screen there. Or you can catch me at any other point, and I'd love to chat radio mics. But thanks for joining me, everyone, and I will see you soon.